Here is a topspin forehand analysis. Copy some of the things that I mentioned in this video to improve your topspin forehand. I'm going to show you some clips from a front view and also from a back view. Let's break them down in slow motion. So the first one, I want you to notice that the player hits the ball from an open stance. So his outside leg is the last step that he takes to the ball. And look at the direction that his feet are pointed, right? They're pointed out to the left. And this really allows him to rotate his hips and turn his shoulders as well on the shot. Watch as he makes his first move to the ball. You'll notice his right foot steps out and his right shoulder begins to turn, which brings the paddle back. So watch this move right here. Right foot comes across, shoulder begins to turn, so the paddle starts going back. He's starting the process of getting ready right from his first step. Another thing that's important here is that the paddle head is higher than his hand. So when he begins to turn, notice the angle of the paddle right there. It's higher than his hand. He continues the turning process, and right now, at this stage, he takes his non-dominant hand off of the paddle. So see how that little bit of separation there. Before this moment, his non-dominant hand was on the paddle, which is really good for helping you turn your shoulders. So his hand is resting on the paddle, helping him turn his shoulders. Then he reaches this stage here where his shoulders are turned, his non-dominant hand comes off of the paddle. Now look at this stage as well, how the face of the paddle is pointed out to the crowd. So this is a good position to be in here. Now look how his non-dominant hand is pointed out to the side, not pointed at the ball. And then look at this stage, how the paddle is back and the face of the paddle is slightly angled down to the ground. This angle will vary based on the grip that you're using. I also want you to look at the position of his head right now. So look how tall he is right now. And then as he starts his swing, look how much taller he gets. So when he's finishing his swing, he reaches a maximum height right there. So what he's doing is he's pushing into the ground. So he's lowering down as he takes that final step. He lowers down, that foot hits the ground, lowers down so he's only this tall. And then as he starts his swing, he is lifting up, getting taller as he's hitting. So look at the level change there. So this is creating a great amount of ground force power coming from the legs because he's sitting and then lifting. Now notice how that right foot comes off the ground after his swing, but he's still in a very balanced position. His weight does not transfer forward because he's hitting out of an open stance on a difficult deep shot. And then he follows through over his shoulder, but he's maintaining this same paddle angle the whole time, right? So the paddle is essentially just going like a windshield wiper, right? It's not changing angle. He's not using his wrist to turn the paddle forward or to open the face of the paddle. The back of the paddle was facing the camera, and the back of the paddle is again facing the camera at the end. And then the final thing on this swing is watch how he crosses over his feet to recover back to his recovery position. Same thing on this next forehand. Notice as he starts to turn, his non-dominant hand remains on the paddle. That helps him turn his shoulders and keep that paddle in that nice upright position. Here his paddle is pointed towards the crowd, the face of the paddle, and then at this moment he releases his non-dominant hand. He prepares to take his final step, and so how he does that is he actually pushes from this leg onto his front foot, creating a very strong final step. Look how much distance he covers with that step. And as he's taking that step, he's also lowering his height. So he's getting smaller, right? Look at the position of his head right now. And then after he hits, look how much he rises up to get taller. So again, we're talking about using the ground forces to generate more energy. And so he's sitting and then lifting. Now this is a ball in front of him, and so he's stepping onto his right foot to hit it because he's moving into the court. Watch at this moment how the paddle is facing the crowd, and then suddenly it flips. So now the tip of the paddle is pointed at the back fence. The paddle face is slightly down, and so this motion right here is creating a lot of acceleration ability on his swing. Notice that non-dominant hand is still pointed out to the side, but then the moment that he starts his swing, that hand moves out of the way. So he's rotating his upper body, that hand moves out of the way. He's coming from below the ball with the top edge of that paddle first. Notice also how there's a little bit of space in between his side and his elbow. So this is good. You want to have a little bit of space there. You don't need this arm to be completely straight when you hit, but you want to have that little bit of space so there's a gap there. Because he's generating so much momentum with that forward step from his right foot, watch the position that he ends up in after he hits the ball. So the back leg actually comes off of the ground there, and then to catch his balance, he actually does a hop onto his front foot. So he steps and lands on the ground on his right foot, but then after he hits, he hops to maintain his balance. Notice the foot was facing off to the side, and then at the end, that foot is facing forward because he's completed a full body rotation. So his toes are pointed off to the left. After he hits, his toes are pointed towards the net, and this back leg comes around because his body is naturally rotating from left to right. And watch as he goes to recover, he does a crossover step with the left foot to be able to get back to his recovery position faster. Now let's take a look at some forehands from a front view. So same thing, this first one, he's hitting out of an open stance. So first thing he does is a little pivot on his outside foot. I want you to notice how his toes, they're facing forward as he pivots. Now his toes are facing at a different angle. This allows him to open up his hips and start his turn. So that little pivot, and then he brings his right foot across. So he's stepping across with his right foot. Notice as he's doing that as well, that his right shoulder begins to turn and the paddle starts to go back. So crossover step, that right shoulder starts to turn, paddle starts to go back, and at this stage, notice how his non-dominant hand is on the paddle. He keeps it on the paddle while he's turning, and then the head of the paddle is higher than his hand. So he crosses over with his right foot, then he takes a second step with his left foot. And notice the position of his toes here. It's pointed to the outside, right? If his toes were pointed too much towards the court, it would be harder to rotate the hips. Also notice that it's a large size step, so he's able to generate a lot of force because his body is more spread out than if you were to take a small step coming into the ball. Non-dominant hand is still on the paddle at this stage. Now he releases it, but his front shoulder is all the way turned, right? So his chin is almost on his front shoulder. If you look here, his chin is almost on his front shoulder because that shoulder is turned past 90 degrees. Notice at this stage how his non-dominant hand is pointed to the outside. It's almost in the way of the paddle. But what's going to happen is when he starts his swing, this hand is going to get out of the way. He's uncoiling the energy that he created by turning his shoulders. Also want you to notice that as he lands on the ground with his final step, I want you to notice his height right now. And then when he goes to hit the ball, look how he gets taller. So his final height is substantially higher than where he was before. So let's look at that again. He bends into that final step, so he gets shorter, and then he gets taller as he's hitting. So it's not just his arm, it's not just his shoulders, but his whole body is involved in the swing because he's getting taller. He's using the ground forces to create more energy. Now I want you to notice that right as he starts his swing, his non-dominant hand tucks and comes out of the way. And look how high at this stage his non-dominant hand is. Comes in from below the ball, so the ball is striking near the top edge of the paddle first so that he can generate the topspin on the ball. Makes contact, and look at that little bit of space in between his elbow and his side now. Again, notice the landing here. After his shot, he lands on his outside foot, then lands on his inside foot, but he's not transferring his weight forward because the ball came in a lot deeper, so it didn't give him an opportunity to step into the court to play it. So therefore he's playing it out of an open stance, but he's maintaining balance the whole time as he's doing that. This next one's a little bit shorter ball. I want you to watch as he starts the turning process as he takes this step here. So he does a little bit of a shuffle first just to gain some ground. Then he steps with that outside foot, and his shoulder has begun turning at this stage. His non-dominant hand's on the paddle still, paddles higher than his hand at this stage. And then watch as he brings this right foot forward into a strong step, and notice how he bends at the same time. So this is how tall he is right now. When he hits, look how much taller he gets. So he's using the ground forces to create energy. Look how that shoulder's almost on his chin. And then as he starts his swing, that non-dominant hand gets out of the way and tucks. And look how that hand is higher than his contact point. Now on his contact point, look how he makes contact with the ball near the upper edge of the paddle first, and it rolls its way down the paddle. So he's really creating that brushing motion to put topspin on the ball. And again, look at this little bit of space that he has between his elbow and his side. And then because he took a strong step onto this front leg, notice how he does a little hop forward after that to recapture his balance. His body continues to rotate, and so notice how his feet turn towards the net, and he swings that back leg around to land in a balanced position.